Welcome back to part 8 of this module on decision making, where we're going to be talking about developing options for your decision. So right now we're on the 4th step of the 7-step decision making model. We've talked about identifying your key stakeholders for the decision, clarifying the decision statement, and then identifying the key objectives, musts and wants for your decision. The next step, step 4, is developing options or alternatives. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that up until this point, we have not been talking at all about what our options or alternatives are, or what things we have to choose among, right? So if we were talking about buying a car, I haven't been talking about the 10 or 20 different cars I'm considering. If we're talking about the ALLC Leadership Summit, I haven't been talking about which countries and nations and cities we could hold the summit in. We haven't been talking about any options at all up until this point, and that's important. In this decision-making process, it's very important that you try not to think about or talk about any of the options until this step. And the reason is, if you're thinking about particular options or alternatives that you might choose, people have a tendency then, when they're coming up with their list of objectives, they have a tendency to describe the option that they already like the most when they're coming up with their objectives, and say, oh, well, let's see, I know I kind of like that convertible car. So I'm going to say one of my objectives is convertible. Oh, and the car's green. I'm going to say I like green cars. Oh, and the car's a manual. I'm going to say I like manuals. And they just start describing everything about the best option in their mind to begin with. And while that's totally understandable, it's not a rational way of coming up with your list of objectives. What you want to do is say, what are the most important things to us? Despite what our options are, in an ideal world, what would we most like to get out of this decision? So try not to think about your alternatives and options until this step. If people start bringing them up, say, let's wait and talk about the alternatives later, until we get to this step, step 4, developing options, alternatives, and proposals. And all we're doing at this point is brainstorming. So we say to the group of people involved, hey, what do you see as some of the things we can consider? What options do we have? Right? What ideas do you have of things we could consider for this decision? What proposals do you have? And let people brainstorm, get all their ideas out. And don't evaluate or critique people's ideas on things you can consider for this decision. That's not the time and place yet to evaluate or criticize or critique people's ideas. You want them just to be creative and list out everything that's on their mind, because there might be aspects of some of their ideas that are really good, and it might help you to be more creative in coming up with other solutions later on down the road, if you just let people be creative and come up with their full list of options at this time. So if we look at the ALLC example again, where we're trying to pick a location for our annual leadership summit, we already listed all of our objectives, and now we started asking ourselves, well, what choices do we have? Where could we hold this leadership summit? And at the time, many of our core team members were located in Thailand. So we said, well, hey, let's just hold it every year in Thailand. That's an option, right? It'd be easy for us. We all live in Thailand. So that was one of the options. We said, yeah, annual summit in Thailand. And then we also said, well, what about just doing it in Chiang Mai every year? Because several of us live in Chiang Mai. What if we did it in Chiang Mai every 2 years? Because it'd be easier for us if we did it in Chiang Mai every 2 years. So that was an option we considered. We also said, well, what if we try to rotate the summit regionally, do it in a different region every year? And then another idea was, what if we try to do it in a different nation every year, or just rotate it across nations? These were some of the ideas. We actually had more, but just to give you an idea, we started listing out our options and alternatives for where could we hold the Leadership Summit. And so you're going to want to do the same. What are your options that you can consider for your decision?